My mother announced it over roast chicken like it was already done. Not a question. Not even a suggestion. Just fact. Casual. Like she was telling me the weather. It's sorted. Your brother's moving into your place. And she actually clapped her hands together after she said it. Like she just solved a puzzle. I sat there at that dinner table staring at her, and for a second my brain just stopped. Because I needed a moment to process what had just happened. My mother had just told me, at Sunday dinner, in front of my smug 29-year-old brother who was already leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, that he was moving into my home. The home I bought. The home I saved for over years of saying no to vacations, no to new clothes, no to basically anything that wasn't a mortgage payment. That home. And nobody at that table, not my mother Diane, not my father Paul, not my brother Nick, nobody looked even slightly uncertain about this. They looked like they were waiting for me to say thank you. I didn't say thank you. But I also didn't fight back. Not that night. What I did instead was something none of them saw coming. Because 3 weeks later, when my mother called to ask what day was good for them to come over with the moving truck, my house was already sold. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story didn't start at that dinner table. It started about 30 years before it, the moment my parents decided, without ever saying it out loud, that one of their children mattered more than the other. I grew up in a house where the rules were different depending on which kid you were. Nick, my younger brother by 3 years, was the golden one. And I want to be careful here, because I'm not saying my parents were evil people. I'm saying they had a blind spot the size of a house, and that blind spot had Nick's name on it. He was charming, he was charismatic, and from the time he was little, he had this ability to make my parents feel like whatever he was doing right now was the most important and exciting thing in the world. When Nick turned 18, they bought him a brand new car so he could take a cross-country road trip to find himself. When I turned 18, my mother handed me a bus schedule and told me to start saving. When Nick decided he wanted to study fine arts at university, they paid every cent of his tuition without blinking. When I got into my statistics program, I was told I'd need to cover half of it myself. I worked 2 part-time jobs and applied for every scholarship I could find. My parents called it building character. I called it what it was, a double standard that had been in place since before I was old enough to name it. The thing is, I was good at everything they didn't reward. I graduated with honors. I climbed the career ladder faster than most people my age. By 28, I had saved enough for a down payment on my own house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A modest little 2-bedroom bungalow. Nothing fancy. But it was mine, and I had built it from scratch, from years of discipline and sacrifice and saying no to myself over and over again. My parents' response to me buying my own home? My mother said, and I quote, "Oh, Jocelyn's place is so close to that great butcher shop." That was it. That was the acknowledgement. The butcher shop. Within months, my spare bedroom had become a storage unit for Nick's abandoned hobbies. A pottery wheel he used twice. DJ turntables still in the box. An easel covered in dried paint from a painting phase that lasted about 6 weeks. My parents would just drop things off. "We need somewhere to put this, Jocelyn. You have the space, Jocelyn." And I would nod and smile because that's what I did. That was my role in this family. Be useful. Be accommodating. Don't make a fuss. And every time I bent, they pushed a little further. About 3 months before that dinner, Nick's car broke down. He couldn't afford the repairs. So my mother called me and explained, very reasonably, she thought, that Nick would just need to borrow my car for a few weeks because he had networking events to get to. And I worked from home, so really, did I even need it? I gave him the car. I rearranged my schedule, figured out the bus routes, and spent 3 weeks getting to appointments on public transit while my brother drove around in my vehicle going to networking events that apparently led nowhere. When I got the car back, the gas tank was empty. There was a fresh dent on the passenger door. Nick said he didn't know anything about it. No apology. No offer to fix it. Nothing. It was just expected. All of it was just expected. Then came the rent situation. Nick had been living in a trendy downtown apartment that, let's be honest, he could never actually afford. He got 3 months behind on rent. The reason? He had taken his rent money and spent it on a top-of-the-line computer because, in his words, you have to invest in the tools of the trade. He was about to be evicted. The frantic call came from my mother, not him. Jocelyn, you have to help. Your brother is going to be on the street. I transferred him the money. A number that made me feel sick when I hit send. He accepted it the way you'd accept change at a checkout counter. No real thank you. No mention of paying it back. Just received, moved on. That was the pattern. That had always been the pattern. And I kept feeding it, because somewhere deep down I still believed that if I was helpful enough, responsible enough, present enough, they would eventually see me. Not as the backup plan. Not as the support beam. Just as Jocelyn. Their daughter. A real person with her own needs. That belief kept me sitting at those Sunday dinners for years. The Sunday everything changed started exactly like every other Sunday. The roast chicken was in the oven. My dad was in his armchair with his newspaper. My mother was in the kitchen with that particular energy she gets when she's about to announce something she's very pleased with. And Nick was on the sofa scrolling his phone, giving me a lazy grin when I walked in. Hey sis. Brace yourself. Big things are happening. Big things, it turned out, meant Nick was pivoting, again. This time from graphic designer to brand consultant and social media influencer. He'd spent the last of the money I'd lent him on a weekend seminar that had completely changed his life. He used words like synergy and disruption and personal branding. He talked about building his online presence and developing his portfolio and launching his consultancy. It sounded impressive if you didn't know Nick, but I did know Nick, and I recognized the script. I had heard versions of it for a decade. The new part, the part one didn't see coming, was the solution they'd already decided on to support this latest launch. We moved to the dinner table. My mother brought out the food. The conversation was light and easy, almost suspiciously pleasant. They talked about the neighbor's new puppy, my dad's golf game. And then my mother set down the serving spoon, folded her hands, and turned to me with a smile that I can only describe as triumphant. Well, we've come up with the perfect solution to help Nick get back on his feet, she said. It's really the most sensible plan. I asked what plan. Since you have that spare bedroom and you work from home anyway, it's sorted. Your brother's moving into your place. She actually clapped her hands when she said it. Just for a few months. 6, maybe 8 at the most. Just while he gets his business off the ground. It'll be perfect. He'll have a quiet place to work, and you won't be all alone in that house anymore. The room went quiet. My father kept eating. Nick was watching me with this expectant look on his face, like he was waiting for me to accept a gift. And my mother was beaming, genuinely beaming, like she had just done something wonderful. They had planned this. The whole dinner, the cheerful atmosphere, the exciting news, the good china, it was all a setup. A stage. And I was the last one to find out what the play was about. I said, barely above a whisper, "You're joking, right?" My mother's smile flickered. "Don't be dramatic, Jocelyn. It's the logical solution. Why would we pay for another apartment when you have a perfectly good room sitting empty?" I told her it wasn't empty. It was my office. The room I worked in every single day. The reason I could afford the house in the first place. She waved her hand. "Oh, you can work at the kitchen table." My father, without looking up from his plate, added, "Nick can't live with us. Your mother and I are retired. We need our peace and quiet. You're young. You can handle the disruption." And then Nick looked me dead in the eye and said, "Come on, Jocelyn. Don't be so selfish. It's a huge house for one person. What's the big deal? It'll be fun. We can hang out. Fun." He thought it would be fun. He was already picturing it. Me working while he slept in. Him using my things, eating my food, taking over my living room, turning my office into his bedroom. And my job would be to smile and pay the mortgage while he launched his consultancy. It would be 3 months that turned into 8, that turned into 2 years, and I knew it as surely as I knew anything. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my napkin on the table. I just said, "You can't decide who lives in my house. It's my house." I left shortly after. Told them I wasn't feeling well. My mother called out as I walked out the door, actually called out, "Think about it, dear. Nick can start moving his things next weekend." No room for negotiation. The decision was final. In her mind, I just hadn't fully accepted it yet. The drive home that night was a lot of red lights and a lot of silence and a lot of thinking. I walked into my house and stood in the middle of my living room, and for the first time I looked at it the way they looked at it. Not as something I had built. As a resource. A convenient asset with a spare room and a daughter who never said no hard enough to mean it. That was the moment I understood something I should have understood years ago. As long as I owned that house, it was never going to be just mine. It was always going to be their backup plan. Their emergency fund. Their answer to every problem that required someone else to sacrifice something. And I was always going to be the someone else. I called Harriet the next morning. Harriet is my best friend and also a lawyer, and she has exactly zero tolerance for people who treat other people like a resource. I told her everything. The dinner, the announcement, my mother's texts that had already started coming in. She'd sent me a photo of a desk she thought would be perfect for Nick's room, and Nick's own text asking if he could move my 50-inch TV to the living room. He wasn't even moved in yet, and he was already rearranging my house. Harriet listened to all of it. And then she said, "Jocelyn, this is not family helping family. This is a parasitic relationship and you are the host. They have been draining you for years and now they want to move into the bloodstream." She told me that a simple no wasn't going to work. That they would treat no as the opening position in a negotiation. They would counter. They would guilt trip. They would recruit other family members to pressure me. A no was just a delay. What I needed, she said, was to create a situation where no was the only possible answer. A situation that was irreversible. I drove home from that coffee shop a different person than the one who had walked in. Here's the thing about being a data analyst. When you have a problem, you break it down into variables. You look at the numbers. You figure out what you actually have to work with. That Monday evening I sat down with my financial records. Mortgage balance. Current market value estimate. Savings. Investment portfolio. I laid it all out. And what I found was this: the market in my neighborhood had been running hot. My house had appreciated significantly since I bought it. If I sold, and sold quickly, I would walk away with a profit that would give me a serious financial cushion. Enough to rent a new apartment in a different part of the city. Enough to travel. Enough to actually exhale for the first time in years. My house wasn't a tether. It was a ticket. I just had to decide to use it. The next morning I called a real estate agent, the best one in my area, a woman with a reputation for efficiency and discretion. I told her I was looking for a quiet, quick sale. No open houses. Private if possible. She called me back the next day with a number that was even better than I'd estimated. And she already had buyers in mind, a young couple who had been searching in that exact neighborhood for months and kept getting outbid. Pre-approved, motivated, ready to move fast. I said, "Let's do it." While the sale moved forward, I started quietly dismantling my life there. I wasn't going to rent a moving truck and park it in the driveway. My parents lived close enough that a neighbor might say something. So I did it slowly, methodically. Every evening after work I would pack a carload of boxes and drive them to a storage unit I'd rented across town. Books, clothes, personal things. The small stuff first. I went through the spare room and hauled every one of Nick's abandoned hobby items out to the garage. The pottery wheel. The turntables. The paint-covered easel. I photographed them all and posted them online for free, must pick up today. Within 2 hours, strangers had cleared out every single thing. A young art student took the easel, genuinely delighted. I stood in the doorway of that empty room and felt something shift in my chest. That was my office again. My space. I sold the bigger furniture online too. My dining table, the sofa, the guest bed. Low prices, immediate pickup, no questions. My house began to echo. And instead of feeling sad about that, I felt lighter with every piece that left. I found an apartment about a week in. Modern one-bedroom in a building with a security door, a balcony looking out over a park, in a part of the city my family almost never came to. I went to see it on a Tuesday afternoon, signed the lease that same day, and set the move-in date for the day after my house sale was scheduled to close. A blank slate. A new address they didn't know. A door without a key in their possession. Meanwhile, my family's silence continued. After that Sunday dinner, when I stopped responding to their calls and texts, they switched tactics. No more pressure campaign. Just nothing. Harriet had predicted this. She told me it was the silent treatment, a punishment designed to make me anxious, to make me come crawling back, ready to comply just to restore the peace. I let them have their silence. It was honestly the greatest gift they could have given me, because it bought me 3 completely uninterrupted weeks to execute my plan without interference. On a Friday, 3 weeks after that dinner, the formal offer on my house came in. Full asking price. No conditions. Quick close. I signed the acceptance form that same afternoon. The closing happened on a Thursday morning. I sat in a lawyer's office across from a young couple who could barely contain their excitement. The woman was expecting their first child. They talked about which room would be the nursery. They talked about the backyard. They were so genuinely happy that for a moment I just looked at them and thought, this is right. This is exactly right. My house was going to be someone's real home. Not a crash pad for my brother's latest scheme. Not a storage unit. Someone's actual home, with a baby and a backyard and people who would love it. I picked up the pen. I signed every page. With every signature, something I can only describe as a physical weight came off me. I wasn't just signing away a property. I was signing away the version of myself who kept hoping my family would eventually see me. The version who transferred rent money and gave up her car and rearranged her whole schedule because she still believed that being good enough would someday be enough. When the last page was done, the lawyer shook my hand and said congratulations. The funds would be in my account by end of day. I walked out into the afternoon, and I just stood there on the sidewalk for a second, breathing. Done. I was officially without a house, and I had never felt more solid in my life. There was still one thing left to do. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for the last time. I felt completely calm. The kind of calm you feel when you already know how everything ends. I walked in without knocking, the way I always did. They were all in the living room. The expressions on their faces when they saw me, surprise, then immediate smug satisfaction. My mother's whole body language shifted into this gracious, I forgive you posture. My father folded his newspaper slowly. Nick looked up from the sofa with this knowing smirk, like I'd finally come to my senses. Well, look who decided to show up, my mother said. That faux sweet voice she uses when she wants to sound forgiving but is actually gloating. I sat down. Told them I assumed we still had things to discuss. My mother's face lit up. That was what she wanted to hear. She launched right into it. Very childish of you to ignore us. We've already started packing some of Nick's things. He can be ready to move in next Saturday, and said it all with the air of someone generously rescheduling a meeting I had missed without good reason. We moved to the table for dinner. The meal was served mostly in silence, everyone waiting for me to fully capitulate. I ate slowly. Didn't rush. Let them wait. My father finally broke first. Cleared his throat. Asked about this problem I had mentioned when I arrived. My mother jumped in immediately. Before I could even open my mouth, she started, before you start with any excuses, let's be clear. Your brother is moving into your place while he gets back on his feet. It is happening. He needs a stable environment and you are going to provide it. It is what a good sister, a good daughter does. I let her finish. I took a breath, and I said, I understand your position completely. And you know, you're right. He can certainly move in. Dead silence. My mother's face relaxed. Nick leaned back in his chair. My father exhaled. And then I said, sure, if the new owners don't mind. Nobody moved. My mother's smile froze. Just stopped. Didn't fall, didn't collapse, just froze on her face like a screenshot. My father's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Nick's smirk was just gone. My dad was the first to find his voice. One word, owners. My mother was next, and when she found her voice it was at full volume. What did you say? What new owners? What are you talking about, Jocelyn? I kept my voice level. I'm talking about the young couple who bought my house. The sale closed on Friday. I moved my things out yesterday. They get the keys tomorrow morning. So if Nick wants to move in, he'll need to talk to them. Though I don't think they have a spare room, they mentioned they're turning it into a nursery. What happened next I can only describe as a detonation. My mother shot up from her chair so fast it scraped against the floor. Her face went red and blotchy and she was shaking. You sold your house? You sold your house without telling us? I asked her, very calmly, why I would have told her. It was my house. My asset. My decision. She said I did it to spite them. Nick, once the reality fully hit him that his rent-free situation had just been permanently cancelled, pushed back from the table and started yelling about selfishness, about how I couldn't stand to help my own brother for a few months, about what kind of person does this. I looked at him. A few months, Nick? You have never been on your own 2 feet. This was not going to be a few months. This was going to be my life. Me working at my kitchen table while you lived rent-free in my office pursuing another dream that went nowhere. Me paying the mortgage while you invested in the tools of the trade. No. I'm done. My mother was crying by then, that particular kind of crying that's more fury than grief. She brought up sacrifice, how she and my father had given up everything for their children. And that was the part where I stopped being calm. You sacrificed my childhood, I said, and my voice finally had some edge to it. You sacrificed my opportunities and my peace of mind for him. I worked for everything I have. He was given everything he has. And then you had the nerve to try to give him my house too. The one thing I built entirely on my own, away from all of you. You didn't ask me. You told me. You drew up the plans for my life and didn't bother to include the person actually living it. So I drew new ones. My father asked, quietly, where I was living. I told him I had an apartment. And no, they wouldn't have the address. And no, they wouldn't have a key. They had lost the privilege of knowing where I lived. I picked up my purse. My mother was sobbing. Nick was staring at me with a look I had never seen on his face before, pure disbelief, because this had genuinely never occurred to him as a possible outcome. My father looked pale and old and somehow smaller than I'd ever seen him. I paused at the door. I hope you have room in the basement, Mom, I said. Because it looks like Nick is moving back home. I walked out. I didn't look back. The weeks after that were the quietest of my life. And I mean that in the best possible way. I'd expected the explosion to continue. Angry voicemails, calls from aunts and cousins recruited to talk sense into me, maybe even someone showing up at my building. But there was almost nothing. A few calls I didn't answer. A couple of texts I didn't respond to. It seemed like what I had done was so far outside what they thought I was capable of that it broke their whole playbook. They didn't have a move for this. They had built a game where I always played the same position, and I had walked off the field entirely. My new apartment was everything my old house had quietly not been. Nobody else had a key. Nobody had ever stored anything there. Nobody knew the address. My home office was a corner of the living room I had chosen myself, set up exactly how I wanted it, and when I sat down to work there was no low-level anxiety about who might drop by or what new ask was coming. I bought new furniture that matched my taste. I painted the walls the color I wanted. Every single decision in that space was mine from start to finish. About a month in, a cousin I was close to called me. She said my mother had been calling around the family. She said, almost laughing, that Nick had indeed moved back into my parents' house and was driving them absolutely insane. He treated their place like a hotel. Left his things everywhere. Played loud music. My mother had called my cousin's mother to complain for a full hour. She said she didn't know how I put up with it. My cousin said, she said she doesn't know how you put up with it. And I said, I didn't. My cousin laughed. Good for you. By the way, she was also trying to get me to find out your new address. I figured. Don't worry. I told her I had no idea. That conversation confirmed something I think I'd suspected for a while. The problem had never been me. They didn't want to deal with what they had created, so they had tried to hand the responsibility to someone else. Now that they couldn't, they were stuck living with the reality of it. Every consequence they had spent 30 years helping Nick avoid had finally landed somewhere. It had landed on them. A few more months passed. Nick apparently launched his brand consultancy. I saw it on social media, generic inspirational quotes, blurry photos of him pretending to work at coffee shops. The page had 12 followers, 3 of whom were my parents and one of which appeared to be his own backup account. It was, like every other venture before it, going nowhere. I used some of the money from the house sale and booked a trip to Italy. I had always wanted to go. For years I had told myself it was impractical, too expensive, not the right time. I sat at a cafe in Florence on a sunny Tuesday morning with a cappuccino and no agenda, and I thought, this is the first time in my adult life I have been somewhere with no one's expectations attached to me. It felt enormous. When I got back, there was an email from my father. Subject line, just my name. Jocelyn. He wrote that my mother was struggling. That Nick was still living there. That it was not easy. He hoped I was well. No apology. No acknowledgement that any of this was a situation they had built themselves. Just a carefully worded message designed to see if the old Jocelyn was still reachable. If guilt could still be deployed like a tool. I sat with it for a long moment. I thought about what I would have done a year earlier, called him back, offered to help, gotten pulled back into the orbit of it all. Then I moved the email to the trash without typing a single word. And I went about my evening. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself in some part of it, the part where you keep giving because you're hoping it will eventually be enough, the part where you've told yourself this is just what family does, I want you to hear this directly. There is a difference between family and obligation. There is a difference between love and being used. And knowing that difference, and acting on it, is not selfish. It is survival. I didn't blow up my family because I stopped caring. I walked away because I finally started. I started caring about the person who had worked 2 jobs to pay for her own education. The person who had handed over her car and her savings and her spare room and years of quiet Sunday dinners full of resentment she never voiced. I started caring about her. And the moment I did, I stopped being the support beam. I became the architect. Thanks for listening, and if this story hit home for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about people who finally choose themselves. The most important boundaries you'll ever set are the ones that protect your peace from the people who were supposed to protect it first.